you explained it was perfect, Trash. Like, now I can combat that. But when I have people get up in spaces and they're like, "Oh, Trump's selling you out. Look, he's doing deals with BlackRock." Like, I need something to go out back at these people with and be like, "Well, no, actually, I understand because this is why the deal was done the
So
way
here's
it
how we
was."
do it. Let's
Right?
practice. So let's say that you're that person. They come up in the space and say, "Oh, look, Trump's selling you down the rivers. It's the same thing as 2016. It's a shitty administration. We told y'all are fucking stupid. Blah 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 blah." Like, yeah, okay. Who was the proprietor of ESG and DEI? Who was it? Oh, I don't know. BlackRock. Okay,
BlackRock.
great. Now that we've established that, who was the company that had helped facilitate the buy of all the oil and federal gas leases that were supposedly closed for the green people that supposedly got Biden elected when he signed an executive order? Who bought all the oil and gas leases, because they weren't actually closed, they're still
China.
running to this day. And that's China. It's known as PetroChina, the largest energy producer in China. Okay, so guess who got to open the only American hedge fund in China as a reward for levying ESG and DEI policies, ESG policies on energy makers, like our American energy companies, and giving them scope 3 emissions targets, net zero targets, which are impossible to do if you're an oil and gas producer. We all know that. That's stupid while you're flying around in your private jet. Well, that was BlackRock. And BlackRock got to open their only ETF in China. And so they got to do that. And so who has egg on their face when China, we find out, owned the Panama Canal, and now we are taking it back, and BlackRock is the one that's going to be administering it? Who's getting the egg on their face? Because now they have to not only roll back all of their ESG and DEI requirements for access to capital for American companies, but then also has to pay the money, front the money, and maintain the Panama Canal, and take it away from the very country that you thought you had secured the only American ETF allowed to do business, so they could make money on the $220 billion ETF market in China. Well, that's also BlackRock. And so if China doesn't control the major only port between the Eastern world and the Western world, which is why we put the Panama Canal to begin with in there, and America controls it again. And we're going to force the very same company that made us look all like fools, made us lose our jobs, destroy our economy, make us more poor, send inflation through the roof. That same company, because out of their selfishness and greed, enforced policies on American companies to implement these policies, and American companies couldn't grow, and they had to outsource, or they had to sell, or they had to move their labor and their manufacturing and their staffing overseas just to be able to compete in a market, because they couldn't afford, due to DEI policy, which were wrecking and destroying not only their companies, but also American families and our education system. And the same companies that was rewarded for doing all of this now has to have egg on their face and be the front runners for the very same people that's going to ruin and destroy the Belt and Road Initiative for China. I That's the only way that I can describe, in my opinion, this is the biggest double barrel middle finger and a way to get rid of DEI and ESG for good out of not only international markets, which they are pulling out of international markets, by the way, read the article, and also all American companies. And now American companies can grow. Now we can go full bore, full power on our energy, and we can transport it to the Western Hemisphere very easily, because we control the means of transportation between the East and the West through the Panama Canal again. And we forced the very same company that tried to destroy our economy to have global stakeholder capitalism, otherwise known as communism, in my opinion, and force them to have to be America first if they want to survive, if they want to participate in our economy. That's the only way I can describe this to anybody. And that's the shortest amount of words that I can use.
Well,
That,
and I think that was excellent, Trash. Like in the hot button like points of that, right? And I think like, and this is what I think is important about spaces, right? Is arming people with the information, especially when like crazy shit like this happens, and you kind of have to understand a level of international policy and banking policy, and like let's break it down to simple terms, right? The deal with BlackRock is further ridding our country of the ESG and DEI regulations that were hurting American businesses, while also forcing BlackRock to become America first and support American business, while also getting back control of the Panama Canal.
and destroying China's Belt and Road Initiative, because if they are getting these ports, that means China doesn't own them anymore. And that means access to and the mineral rights that we're going to get out of this Ukraine deal is going to pay back plus more money on the amount of money we spent on Ukraine to begin with. We're going to get it all back through the mineral rights. And then we're also going to have Russia on our side because they're going to get what they want because they're going to keep Crimea, their warm water port. But we're going to make that water port neutral. That means that Ukraine can actually use that same port that Russia's using by themselves alone in that warm water port. And they're going to be able to use Crimea the same way, which is the reason they wanted it to begin with. And the natural land bridge that Russia wanted in the eastern part of Ukraine will still be active, but they're going to be going to a neutral port. Honestly, this is the quickest geopolitical shift I have ever effing seen in my entire life. And I cannot believe I'm actually witnessing it. And I get to watch BlackRock with egg on their face and force them to now use all their resources to be America first just for them to stay in business. And money drives everything. And the egg on their face is priceless in this deal, in my opinion. And
Well, and see,
okay,
oh, go ahead.
and again, it forces this trade war that we're having with China, and all of the exported products coming out of China with tariffs on them is going to drive up the costs, and they can no longer stamp out American manufacturing. I know this because Jennifer, you know what I do for a living. I work for an American manufacturer, and the products that we make, we were getting crushed because there were no tariffs, there was no tax, and we were getting crushed on a cost per square foot basis of the material that we were developing by China. By the time the tariffs and everything settles in, and the cost of the ports and the transportation and their use of the Panama Canal and other ports and other land bridges and warm water ports, when they once had it locked in, which is why they brought Russia into the fold and bought their energy at 50 cents on the dollar, no longer exists. Well, now all of a sudden we've got a different conversation, don't we? And when we have a closed border, we have a really different conversation because fentanyl is going to be a little bit harder to destroy the country from within